What if your mind was your enemy? Not because it was broken, but because the world believed it was cursed. It's 1348. You feel euphoric, unstoppable. But to the world around you, you're not alive with ideas, you're possessed. In a time when priests replaced doctors and exorcisms passed for treatment, your mental health wasn't a condition, it was a death sentence. Forget therapy, forget help. Welcome to a world of chained wrists, boiling oil and cures worse than the symptoms. A world where happiness could be mistaken for heresy and grief could get you burned alive. This is the history of mental health care. And the darkest part, some of these tortures didn't end in the Middle Ages. They survived into our century. So brace yourself, because what you're about to hear isn't just brutal, it's real. Forget medical diagnosis. The moment you show symptoms of depression, anxiety, or psychosis, medieval society has already decided your fate. You're not mentally ill, you're literally possessed by the devil himself. Picture this. You're experiencing auditory hallucinations from schizophrenia. But to everyone around you, those voices aren't symptoms. Instead, they are demons speaking through your mouth. Your family doesn't see a person needing help. They see a walking nightmare that threatens their souls. Then something even worse happens. A village priest arrives with his holy toolkit. Whips, chains, and blessed hammers. Medieval exorcisms weren't prayer circles. They were torture sessions. Historical records show priests would beat victims for hours, believing physical pain would drive out evil spirits, and the screaming was considered just the demons fighting back. You're not getting an exorcism, you're getting executed. And everyone believes they're saving your soul while destroying your body. When beating fails, medieval medicine escalates to the ultimate solution: trephining. Think of a rusty drill bit piercing your skull while you're fully conscious. No anesthesia, just raw agony as they bore holes into your brain to release the trapped demons. The mortality rate, of course, is nearly 100%. If the trauma doesn't kill you instantly, infection will finish the job within hours. Your skull becomes a breeding ground for bacteria in an age without antibiotics. But here's the twisted part. Some medieval doctors actually understood real causes like grief, stress, and poor diet. Yet the church's iron grip on society meant rational medicine was heresy. Supernatural explanations dominated everything. And thinking of the merciful alternative, it was lifelong imprisonment, chained in underground cells, starved, beaten daily by guards who believed they were tormenting demons. You'd beg for death within days, but medieval compassion meant keeping you alive to suffer endlessly. Every treatment was designed to kill you, quickly or slowly. Now, let's enter Bethlehem Hospital in London, founded in 1247, the world's first mental asylum. Originally called the Hospital of St. Mary of Bethlehem, it would later give us the word Bedlam, meaning chaos and confusion. And the name! It was earned through centuries of unimaginable horror. Initially intended as a refuge for the poor and disabled, by the 1370s, Bethlehem began accepting the mentally ill. But accepting is a generous term. What they actually did was warehouse human beings like livestock, cramming them into stone cells barely large enough for a person to lie down. The hospital kept detailed records of their restraint equipment: 4 pairs of manacles, 11 chains, 6 locks, and 2 pairs of stocks. These weren't occasional tools. They were everyday necessities. Patients were chained to walls for months, sometimes years, with no hope of release. But the real nightmare? In the 17th and 18th centuries, Bethlehem became London's most popular tourist attraction. For just 2 pence, visitors could tour the asylum and gawk at the lunatics like animals in a zoo. The mentally ill became entertainment, their suffering a spectacle for the amusement of the sane. As if public humiliation wasn't degrading enough, the Age of Reason brought with it an even more sinister development: scientific torture. By the 18th century, Bethlehem had developed new scientific treatments that made medieval exorcisms look merciful. Enter the rotating chair, a device so sadistic it defies belief. Patients were strapped into a chair suspended from the ceiling and spun at up to 100 rotations per minute until they vomited uncontrollably. The theory: mental illness was caused by corrupted blood that needed to be purged from the body. The reality: pure torture disguised as medicine. Imagine being strapped down, helpless, as the world spins around you at nauseating speeds. Your inner ear screams in agony, your vision blurs beyond recognition, and your body rebels with violent retching. This wasn't a one-time procedure. It was repeated daily for weeks, sometimes months. The spinning chair represents the darkest irony of medieval mental health treatment. As medicine became more scientific, the suffering increased. At least demons were supposed to be evil. These doctors genuinely believed they were helping, but medieval society's cruelty went beyond random torture. They developed an entire systematic approach to madness, a terrifying bureaucracy of human suffering. Medieval society didn't just randomly torture the mentally ill, they developed an entire classification system for different types of madness, each with its own horrific treatment protocol. For instance, melancholia, what we now call depression, was treated with bloodletting and purging, draining pints of blood from already weakened patients. Doctors believed sadness came from excess black bile, and their cures, well, they often killed faster than the condition itself. Then came mania, covering everything from bipolar disorder to ADHD. This required immediate physical restraint. Patients chained spread eagle to walls for days under the twisted logic that if you couldn't move, you couldn't be manic, resulting in muscle atrophy, bed sores, and psychological trauma that made the original condition seem mild. In medieval times, intellectual disabilities such as autism, then referred to as idiocy, were often viewed as divine punishment for a family's sins. As a result, this led to abandonment in forests or being sold to travelling freak shows where victims would perform for crowds until exhaustion or death claimed them. Possession psychosis, schizophrenia, or severe PTSD triggered the full medieval arsenal: exorcism, trephination, burning or live burial, with no middle ground between being cured or proven incurably evil. This systematic approach to suffering revealed perhaps the most chilling aspect of medieval mental health treatment. It wasn't just cruel, it was profitable. Now here's a fact that will make your skin crawl. Mental illness was a business in medieval times. Families could legally sell their mentally instable relatives to asylums, monasteries, or private collectors who displayed them as curiosities. The going rate for a harmless lunatic was about the same as a healthy pig. For a violent madman, you could fetch the price of a good horse. The mentally ill literally had market value based on their entertainment potential. Bethlehem Hospital charged admission fees that funded expansion of their torture facilities. The more grotesque the displays, the higher the ticket prices. They even sold guidebooks describing the most amusing inmates and their particular delusions. Mental suffering became a commodity, packaged and sold to the highest bidder. Wealthy families had another option: private madhouses where discretion was guaranteed for the right price. But don't mistake this for compassion. These facilities were often worse than public asylums. With no oversight and unlimited funds, private madhouse operators could experiment with increasingly creative forms of treatment. Yet amid this darkness, there were glimmers of genuine compassion, though they came from the most unexpected sources. Not everyone in medieval society embraced torture as treatment. In villages across Europe, wise women, often branded as witches by the church, developed surprisingly effective approaches to mental health care. These healers understood that grief, trauma, and stress could manifest as physical symptoms. They used herbal remedies like valerian for anxiety, St. John's wort for depression, and chamomile for sleep disorders. These are plants that modern science has since validated as genuinely therapeutic. More importantly, wise women recognized the healing power of human connection. They provided counseling, community support, and safe spaces for people to process their experiences. They understood that mental health was often linked to social isolation, poverty, and trauma. concepts that wouldn't be officially recognized until the 20th century. But the Church's war on witchcraft systematically eliminated these healers. The very people who offered genuine mental health care were burned alive, their knowledge lost forever. By the late medieval period, supernatural explanations had completely replaced natural healing, leaving the mentally ill with no advocates except demons and devils. This tragic loss of compassionate care would have lasting consequences. As the transition from supernatural to medical thinking proved painfully slow, the transition from supernatural to medical explanations wasn't clean or quick. Even as Renaissance doctors began recognizing mental illness as a medical condition, they still believed in balancing humors through bloodletting, purging, and other harmful practices. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Islamic medicine. During the medieval period, hospitals in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba were developing sophisticated approaches to mental health care that wouldn't appear in Europe for another 400 years. Islamic physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina recognized that mental illness had both physical and psychological components. They used music therapy, occupational therapy, and even early forms of psychotherapy. While European doctors were drilling holes in skulls, Islamic hospitals were treating patients with dignity and achieving genuine recoveries. But the Crusades and religious conflicts prevented this knowledge from spreading to Christian Europe until much later. The result? Centuries of unnecessary suffering that could have been avoided if religious prejudice hadn't blocked medical progress. This historical ignorance would cast a shadow that extended far beyond the medieval period, shaping mental health treatment well into the modern era. The most disturbing truth about medieval mental health treatment isn't just how brutal it was, it's how recently some of these practices finally ended. Mechanical restraints remained standard in many asylums until the 1950s. Patients were still being chained to beds and walls in state hospitals across America, well into the television age. The spinning chair evolved into electroshock therapy, often administered without anesthesia or consent. Lobotomies, essentially modern trephination, were performed on over 40,000 Americans between 1940 and 1960. The procedure involved inserting ice picks through patients' eye sockets to scramble their frontal lobes. The mortality rate was still around 15%, and survivors were often left in vegetative states. Even the entertainment aspect survived. Until the 1960s, many state hospitals offered public tours where visitors could observe patients like zoo animals. The same voyeuristic cruelty that drew crowds to Bethlehem in the 1600s was still generating revenue in the atomic age. These statistics and dates tell only part of the story. Behind every number was a human life destroyed by ignorance and fear. Behind every statistic was a human being whose life was destroyed by medieval ignorance. Consider Joan of Arc, a teenager experiencing what modern psychiatrists might diagnose as religious visions or temporal lobe epilepsy. Her voices made her a saint in victory and a witch in defeat. The same symptoms that elevated her to military command eventually led to her execution. Or think about the countless unnamed individuals whose only crime was grieving too long after losing a child, feeling too anxious about their uncertain future, or hearing voices that no one else could hear. In our time, they might receive therapy, medication, and support. In medieval times, they received chains, beatings, and early graves. The tragedy isn't just what happened to them, it's what was lost to humanity. How many brilliant minds were silenced? How many innovations died in asylum cells? How many potential contributions to art, science, and human knowledge were buried under superstition and fear are the questions we are left with. In medieval times, living with a mental illness ultimately meant torture and death, not because of the condition itself, but because society was deeply unstable. The true madness lay not in those suffering, but in a world that responded to vulnerability with brutality. Thank you for hanging out with us for this episode of Mistreated Medieval. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the Dark Ages to the dawn of the Renaissance. Got a topic you want us to uncover? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay historical,